You're listening to In My Humble Opinion with Charles Lewis and Maxilia Robinson. Only on 101 Jam.
How would you like to win warm, made-to-order donuts? Listen to Miss Kitty and E weekday morning 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. for your chance to get a Duck Donuts hookup. 101 Jams and Duck Donuts, making your morning grind a little sweeter.
Charles, can we play?
Can
we play?
It's probably a conflict of interest. It's probably a conflict
I like
of
Duck
interest.
Donuts too.
Yeah, I do. So I'm gonna have to holler at Kitty and E. See, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Do a little trade. Yeah, so welcome back, y'all. In My Humble Opinion, back like we never left. And this is your home for today's and classics hip hop and R&B.
That's right. Home of the Rise and Grind Morning Show.
That's right, and home of Cheryl Underwood Radio. And you know how we do. Like to be the voice of the people here. And we have a special guest with us right now. So Razor and I are going to kick it over to Max for this long-awaited and anticipated discussion.
Absolutely. That's right. So yes, joining us right now is Tanishka Cruz, who is an attorney at the Legal Aid Justice Center and the owner of Cruz Law. I'll let you give a little background. But first, I want to thank you for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And Tanishka is here today to talk about DACA and the Dreamers, and just share some information that is important and that you all should at least be aware of. So if you would, just kind of give us a little background on yourself.
Sure. So I'm an attorney at the Legal Aid Justice Center here in Charlottesville, Virginia. I work under the Immigrant Advocacy Program, and my work there has been geared towards helping undocumented youth in our area. As of recently, back in August 2017, I opened up a solo practice in town focused on immigration and family law matters.
Okay, great. Now, beginning with DACA, I bump into more people than not who have a hard time differentiating between, okay, what are the Dreamers, what is DACA, and what is it doing? So can you kind of just in layman terms break that down for us?
Sure. So the Dreamers, I believe, it all goes back to what was trying to be passed years ago by, we hear the name Dick Durbin getting thrown around quite a bit nowadays, but he was involved way back. And the idea of the Dreamers are children that are brought to the United States as young, sometimes infants, toddlers, and have grown up here in the United States, but have grown up undocumented.
Okay.
So that's what I generally see when we say Dreamers. That's who that's referring to. DACA is the response to the failure, time and time again, to get something like a DREAM Act passed.
Okay.
So the DREAM Act, is essentially how can we help this group of young Americans, because that's what they are for all intents and purposes. They've grown up here. They sometimes don't even speak the language that is spoken in their home countries. They've attended school next to our children. They have, graduated from colleges, American colleges, that they're in our workforce as nurses, lawyers, our armed forces. So these are, our neighbors, our friends, our colleagues, our classmates.
Right.
And this would be a path for them to obtain some sort of legal status here. Unfortunately, because something like that has failed to pass time and time again, what President Obama did was he wrote an executive action. So that is not something, it's not a law that was passed by Congress, but it allowed for some of the Dreamers to obtain work authorization and deferred action. And deferred action means we're going to temporarily promise not to deport you.
Okay.
And it was only for those who have no criminal record and who were present in the United States at the time that he signed that executive action, and that were a certain age. So there were very, strict requirements around it. So those who have DACA, are the ones that fit under the parameters that were set by President Obama's executive action.
And Miss Cruz, Charles here. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for the work you do.
Thank you.
But I want to ask you, since we are a nation of immigrants, why do you think it is that when it seems to come to those of Latino descent, that it's such a big deal? When there's other people coming in from other countries, and it's been like that, for the, within the modern recorded history of this country. So why do you think that it's that when you have good honest, hardworking people that that just want a piece of this pie? Why do you think people want to make it so difficult? Honestly,
I don't know, but it is very difficult. And I wish I knew the answer to that question, because in this country there is a need for blue collar work. And what you hear right now, the rhetoric being that we want to open the doors to those that are professionals, that are people that that have an education, but we do have a need for a blue collar workforce in the United States. But there, historically we've had trouble passing immigration reform. Why one is preferred over the other is, unfortunately, racial, and a lot of our immigration laws are racist, and they discriminate against, unfortunately, people of color.
Yes.
Typically. So, that's just the history of our immigration policy. And, I think advocating against those types of policies is the way to move forward.
Right.
And breaking down some of the myths or misconceptions that there are with the community.
Are you aware of any counter proposals for the president's, proposition to approve DACA?
Yeah. So right now, what we're hearing a lot about are what's unfortunately being used as a bargaining chip. You have these a promise to citizenship in 10 or 12 years for DACA recipients or people who are DACA eligible, in exchange for funding for a border wall.
And what makes you DACA eligible?
What makes you DACA eligible is your age.
Okay.
At the time where the executive action was entered. So you had to have been 16, and then you can't be over 31. So there are some very particular framework for it. You have to have a high school education or a GED, and you have to have been here continuously since a certain point in time.
Okay.
So it's not like everyone or every child that entered, or everyone who entered as a child, every dreamer is DACA eligible necessarily. So it is quite complicated for some. I've had various clients that are families where some children within the family are eligible while others are not.
Wow.
So it's not a solution, but it certainly was an avenue for what we see is at least 800,000. Now it seems like what Trump is proposing would help 1.8 million. That's what the estimated amount that it will help is. However, what's concerning is what it's going to do to what they call chain migration, but what's really family reunification. So it's different ways where you hear sometimes the rhetoric is, well, why don't people just come here legally? I don't understand. Why can't they just come here legally? The issue is that the avenues for legal status are so narrow, and what these bills are proposing to do is narrowing that even further. So, handicapping someone from being able to petition for a parent or a brother or sister, which is, obviously going to be problematic for the community.
I have a question, Max, if I can. How you doing, Miss Cruz? This is Razor.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing good. I have a two-part question. One, why when we speak of immigrants, it only seems to deal with people that have melanin in their skin? Like, if you're from Russia, could you be an immigrant then?
Absolutely.
So,
our first lady is an immigrant.
That's it. Well, that's where I was going. I like her, Max. I'm glad you brought her. But that's something that I have a problem with. Whenever you speak of immigrants or somebody coming to this country, it only seems to affect the African communities, the South American communities, anybody that has any type of melanin in their skin. But it doesn't apply to like the Caucasian people. I never understood that, but I didn't know if it was a stupid question for me to ask, so I never asked anybody.
No, I don't think it's a stupid question. I don't think that there are any stupid questions with something like immigration law, because it's quite complicated and it's a maze to figure out. Unfortunately, like I said before, our laws are based on excluding people, and historically excluding people based on race and ethnicity and religion. It's just the way that the policies have evolved.
So will she have to go through it? Will the first lady have to go through these jumping through these hoops?
Well, she's already a citizen now, so
but is she?
But I don't think that she had to, though. When her when she first got here, when
It was
she got
probably
married,
easier
things
for
like
her
that.
to obtain a visa.
Right, yeah. She didn't experience
come
So what y'all
visit.
saying? Donald Trump got money. That's what I just heard. Okay, gotcha.
So how easy is it for like these parents, these families that are torn apart? I just recently read something where father was deported and his wife and children were left. How easy or realistic is it for him to then enter, or a family member to then re-enter the United States?
Re-entry after you've been deported, if you've been ordered deported, the consequences for coming back can be really big. You could have criminal charges. You could be locked up federally for something like this. And you could face what they call the permanent bar. So that means that if you actually do have an avenue for adjusting your status, you wouldn't be able to, because now you've re-entered after you've been ordered deported. After 1996, in the Clinton administration, there were some changes that were made to the immigration law that have been quite severe for the immigrant community, where if they stay without permission in the United States for a certain amount of time and they step out of the country, they have automatic bars that shoot up. So for a lot of people, even just getting married or, having your child turn 21 isn't necessarily a solution.
Sound like new Jim Crow.
So families just completely torn apart unless those that are here in the United States decide to return home.
Right. And the way that the criminal justice system interacts with the immigration system, it's hand in hand. And unfortunately, when we're talking about the immigration detention deportation machine, our local criminal justice system is the number one feeder into that pipeline. Just this week on Thursday, the Albemarle County Regional Jail Board decided to continue its policy of notifying ICE when undocumented people are being released and have ICE detainers on them. So they decided to keep that policy in place. And you just have to think, like, what is it about this group of people that you feel that our local criminal justice system wasn't enough, and they have to get punished yet again by facing something like deportation?
Racer kind of alluded to this earlier, but I guess what is the administration's answer for wanting to deport immigrants in the way that they are? Like, what is the cause? What is the problem that they are causing, or what is the effects that they believe is having on America to take action like this?
Well, the rhetoric would have you believe, there's been a lot of strong language in the media, claiming that all immigrants are here even just by way of the way that we're referring to people. Under the Obama administration, many people aren't aware, but the number of deportations were record high. But there was priorities, and we can debate whether or not those were great priorities, but they were going after serious offenders, gang members, terrorists. They had priorities. And now President Trump has kind of lifted that and said everyone here, by virtue of being here without permission, is a criminal. Which really casts a wider net. And we've heard ICE officials come out and say we've been handcuffed, we haven't been able to do our jobs for the past 8 years, and now we're finally free to go out and do what we need to do.
Now, Ms. Cruz, the one thing that I have to ask, that I ask when we speak to our Native American Indian guests, to our Latino and Latina guests, I have to bring up how we work together, and have to ask your opinion on that, and maybe some initiatives you may be part of. Because me personally, I'm one that does not like recreating the wheel. I believe in power in numbers. So when you look at all the different initiatives of different groups, different ethnic groups, some may say special interest groups, what's some of the steps that you've taken, or what were some ways that you would like to see more unity when it comes to just people of color in general and for equal rights?
I think if we could just do better about communicating, especially with youth, what rights are, and knowing what your rights are in different interactions with law enforcement agencies. Just the way that young people are gang identified, and this is something that across the board not only affects the Hispanic community, but also the African American Black community. We have to be better about teaching our children what they need to say, what they don't need to say in an interaction with police, and because in that kind of environment, I've had law enforcement tell me that kids are, they sit in front of a kid, they're talking to them, and they're more than willing to just divulge information. So for kids to know, in different interactions with police, what they need to say, what they don't need to say, how to behave, I think is one of the ways that we can start battling some of these issues. Because if a young kid is gang identified, that's something that lives in the police system.
Right.
And then that child, will eventually be an older young adult who's going to be driving around and just gets pulled over, let's say. And can you imagine how that changes that interaction if the police officer is running that information and all of a sudden it pops up that person is gang identified?
Can I be honest with y'all for a second? Because I'm over here like I'm
I know you will.
Let's say for instance, if I wasn't looking at the young lady speaking and I was reading these words, I would think she was talking about African Americans. That's right. And because of that, there's one common denominator that seems to be oppressing everybody. I think we know where the problem is, but I don't know if we are in positions to make that change. Because there's only one common denominator.
You're right.
It doesn't matter what the person looks like: Muslim, African American, Native American, Spanish. There's one common denominator in this whole oppressive state. So, what do we do, Ms. Cruz, to get people into the decision making? Because if we got you fighting at the grassroots, we got Charles and Max fighting at the grassroots, but then when I go in front of somebody, I got somebody giving me 100 years for what my counterpart is getting community service for. How do we combat that? As African Americans, we didn't know how to combat that, and the black households were tore up in the war against drugs. So I fear that the same thing is about to happen to the Spanish community.
Yeah, and you go back, you look at jury nullification and different things that we do to help, because if we can't get change at the board level, let's say with something like, not making notifications, well, people are going in there, especially like immigrants, for example, for driving without a license in Virginia. If you're an undocumented person in Virginia, you cannot get a driver's license. But the driver's license issue is one that's across the board, hurts so many different people. If you can't pay court costs and court fines, which is something that disproportionately affects poor people, or people who just don't have the resources to pay, they lose their driver's licenses. In Virginia, in this area, you can't survive if you don't drive if you can't drive.
That's right.
So I think organizing and getting together and finding ways where the community has those where there's overlap, I think is powerful, because there's already a lot of movement and a lot of energy behind this effort to help people who end up incarcerated for being unable to pay court costs and losing their licenses. It's similar to the plight that the undocumented people in Virginia are facing, because they just don't have access to a driver's license. But it's the same sort of argument, and they're ending up in the same situation.
Okay. We're going to take a quick break, family. You're tuned in to In My Humble Opinion. We are speaking with Tanishka Cruz of the Legal Aid Justice Center and Cruz Law. We'll be right back to wrap this interview up. Stay tuned. Mi música no discrimina a nadie, así que vamos a romper. Con lo mío todos se mueven. La fiesta la llevo en mis genes. Yo soy la